Hey, hey, hey.
Alright, so the LA Clippers have been a very, very interesting team to follow ever since they acquired both Kawhi Leonard and Paul George 2 off-seasons ago. In their first year together, they were labeled as one of the few teams, if not the only team, that could rival the eventual champion LA Lakers, but unfortunately we had the pandemic, the whole bubble situation, and they ended up just not quite gelling together enough as we saw them blow a 3-1 lead to the Denver Nuggets in the second round before we could even get the LA versus LA, Battle of LA matchup, whatever you want to call it. Then, after being memed all season, they came back with a revamped lineup and a new head coach in Ty Lue. And for some reason, they flew kind of under the radar as a team, most likely due to the fact of their very lackluster bubble performance, but they were definitely a great case study into how much a head coach actually matters in the NBA, because even those who watch them throughout the season or even just watch them in their most recent playoff run where they just got knocked out by the Phoenix Suns in 6 games in the Western Conference, it's very clear to tell that this team is so much better and so much different when being coached by Ty Lue versus Doc Rivers. Which just makes it that much more unfortunate that part of the reason that they did lose in the Western Conference Finals, which was their first time ever in franchise history, by the way, if you somehow missed that fact or maybe you didn't know that, it was the Clippers' first time in there, but obviously they had Kawhi Leonard, Serge Ibaka were both injured for at least the end of the playoff run, for the whole playoff run in Serge Ibaka's case. But overall, I think I'd call this a pretty successful season for the Clippers, as like I said, they've made it farther than they ever had in franchise history before. Obviously, you would have liked to see it end in a championship, but sometimes the dominoes just don't fall your way. NBA can be very, very unlucky at times, but they're now heading into the offseason with a strange path, I'd like to say. And I say that because the future of the LA Clippers franchise is mostly resting in the hands of Kawhi Leonard and his upcoming decision of whether to opt in or opt out of his upcoming player option. We've already started hearing reports of many teams that are trying to build up a sort of plan to try and pry Kawhi away from the Clippers, and that's because he's still only 30 years old. Although he's had a few injury concerns in the past, he has stayed pretty healthy for the most part. Obviously, he did just miss the end of the playoff run with the knee injury, which is a little bit concerning, but other than that, he's fresh off another All-NBA season. He just averaged 25, 6, and 5 with 2 stocks per game on a career-high 62% true shooting percentage. And at the end of the day, he's one of the few players in the NBA who has proven that he's capable of being the number one on a championship team after what he did in 2019 with the Raptors. Albeit you can say what you want about the Warriors or whatever other team being injured. They went out, they won the ring. All props to them. Kawhi was the clear number one. He was the best player on the court for that entire series, maybe even the entire playoff run. So, again, props to Kawhi. But again, this entire situation with the Clippers, Kawhi, it all depends on whether he opts in or opts out. And I will say, I have no inside knowledge at all. I don't claim to be an insider at all. I'm just someone who talks into a camera and makes videos and does some other things related to basketball. In my opinion, I think Kawhi does end up staying. He went to LA for a reason. He seems like he is at home there, at least from what I've heard. So I expect him to stay. But for the fun of it, for the fun of the thought experiment, we're going to look into what would happen if Kawhi stays or Kawhi leaves. If Kawhi stays, the obvious response is to run it back with either the same or a similar team as to what the Clippers had this past season, as they will be able to return all 5 starters and a whole lot of other rotational guys. They just made the Western Conference Finals, and even without Kawhi for the entire series, they pushed the second best team in the league, at least record-wise, to 6 games, and although the series might not have seemed really close, still, to go to 6 games is a very good fight put up by the rest of the team. And I already mentioned how many players would be returning. They'd have Patrick Beverley, Paul George, obviously Kawhi Leonard. They'd have Marcus Morris, Ivica Zubac, and then off the bench they'd have Terrence Mann, Rajon Rondo, Luke Kennard, and I'd assume that if Kawhi stays and opts into his contract, then Serge Ibaka will probably opt into his as well, so you could throw him into the bunch as well. From there, the only 4 players who are currently not on contract for next season include Patrick Patterson, who is expendable, not a part of the playoff rotation, can be filled in by anyone else in the league. DeMarcus Cousins, he was a part of some playoff rotations series to series, but I'd also venture out to say that he's pretty expendable as well as a backup center. Nicholas Batum, he's actually someone who is pretty crucial to their 2021 season run, just based off the simple fact that he can defend 1 through 5, he can shoot the ball, he passes the ball, he doesn't have to have the ball in his hands to be an effective player. You can plug him in and start him at pretty much every position, and he's on the minimum contract, so he was pretty much the ideal, almost perfect rotation guy that you could have either off the bench or in the starting lineup. And the fourth person who's currently non-contract is Reggie Slip and Slide Jackson, who very well might have played himself into a bigger contract than the Clippers will be able to give him this offseason. I said in a previous video that his scoring averages went up from 10 points per game to 17 points per game, which is pretty absurd. And again, I could see him coming back just because he did seem pretty emotional about being thankful to the Clippers for giving him the chance, so maybe he comes back on a discount, but I wouldn't be surprised if some teams throw him a decent amount of money this offseason. Either way, if they were to run it back with a team like this or similar to this, they're definitely contenders. They have been contenders since the day they brought on Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. And again, we'll probably just be having this similar conversation yet again next offseason when Kawhi's contract is actually up for good. Now, if we look at the other side of things, if Kawhi were to leave this offseason and opt out, then things could get pretty weird. First off, the same rule applies to Serge Ibaka. If Kawhi opts out, I'd assume that Ibaka will also opt out and search for a different team that is ready for contention at the start of next season. Second, with Kawhi opting out, that means that the Clippers do not have to pay him his $36 million that he'd be owed, which means that they'd have plenty of cap space now to go out and re-sign guys like Nicolas Batum or Reggie Jackson if they so want to. Pretty much it's just give them the freedom to actually go out and match their offers or sign them to multi-year deals if they so want to do that. And in response to that, you might be saying to your screen right now, Noah, why wouldn't they just go out and sign another player for the max to replace Kawhi? And to that, I'd say, who in the upcoming free agency class is going to be worthwhile to be paid that and both fill Kawhi's shoes at the same time? Because there's only a few that I could see. There are only 3 players in the upcoming class who I'd be comfortable throwing $30 million or more at, and those people are Kawhi Leonard, who obviously isn't going to opt out and then come back. There's CP3, who I very much doubt is going to be leaving Phoenix after the season. I don't know why, I just have a feeling not a whole lot of reasoning there. And then there's Kyle Lowry, who is a great player, ton of respect towards Kyle Lowry for as long as he's been playing, but I just don't think a duo of him and Paul George is anywhere near as scary as a duo of Kawhi and Paul George, or, you get the idea. Instead, I think it would be in the Clippers' best interest to go and sign the rotational guys first. Make sure you hold on to either Batum or Reggie Jackson or whoever you want to go out and get this free agency, but save up space and try to make the big splash play in next year's free agency, in the 2022 free agency class. By then, all of James Harden, Russell Westbrook, Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, and Kyrie Irving will have player options, not to mention this guy by the name of Steph Curry will be an unrestricted free agent as well. Not to mention John Wall, Kemba Walker, and Jimmy Butler also have player options as well. I just don't think they quite move the needle as much as some of those other guys. I also say that because even just looking at the current state of the Clippers contracts, you can see that they already have Paul George, Marcus Morris, Ivica Zubac, Luke Kennard, and Terrence Mann will all be on the books for that season already. Plus, you can be done with Pat Bev and Rajon Rondo if you want to at that point, which will save you some money. And as I mentioned, you can still have Batum and or Jackson on the roster if you so please. All in all those names I just listed, plus any of those superstar caliber players from that free agency class, could definitely help fill Kawhi's shoes and make that team a contender. You also have to think about potential draft picks or just, like I said, other rotational type guys that the Clippers might have signed for agency for the low. Just overall, they could easily be another contending team in just a year or two removed from Kawhi leaving. But obviously this is all just hypothetical as well, just a fun little thought experiment. It's rare that nothing ever changes between now and 2 years down the line, So I'm assuming something will probably happen that will change the direction the Clippers will actually go down. You never know if it'll be an injury, maybe a draft pick over underperforms, maybe players on the roster start over underperforming. Who knows? Again, this is all just a thought experiment, but it's still fun to look at. Either way, I think the most important takeaway you could take from this little thought experiment is that Paul George being on contract for at least the next 3 years, he has the player option 4 years from now, but having Paul George locked down for so many years is going to make the Clippers' job a whole lot easier. There's plenty of time for the Clippers front office to go out and make moves while being either one piece away, if Kawhi leaves, or being contenders if Kawhi stays. So at the end of the day, even if Kawhi's decision and or decisions do have a huge impact on where this franchise is planning to go years from now, I think it's safe to say that fans of the Clippers should feel reassured that their team is in a good spot no matter what really happens, unless their front office starts making really stupid decisions, which isn't out of the realm of possibilities, but it'd be pretty hard to mess something up that's going as good as their current roster is. I think outside of acquiring both Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, easily the best move that the Clippers have made over the past couple of years is getting rid of Doc Rivers and bringing on Ty Lue, because Ty Lue is an amazing head coach. He has seemed to be like a very sturdy rock and a very just sturdy foundation for the team. And like I said, they already have one star player in Paul George. They either just need to do their best to retain Kawhi Leonard or just be patient, don't make any stupid moves, any stupid mistakes, and then go out and get another superstar that you could pair with them the following year. Either way, Clippers fans should be feeling pretty good about themselves right now, even if you did just lose in the Western Conference Finals and potentially miss out on one of the easier rings that we've seen in the NBA over the past couple of seasons.